It doesn't matter to me if you're some shoot fighter, if you're some karate.
Wrestling with regret. Let's get it. Yeah.
Hey everyone, did you see whose existence WWE acknowledged recently? Only one of the coolest characters of the late 90s, Mortis.
Weighing in at 252 pounds, Mortis.
After the invasion storyline died down, Chris Kanyon was, some would say bewilderingly, barely used on WWE television. In fact, his most notable appearance came as chair fodder for The Undertaker in a segment that has since been chopped up to hell because he sang a song the company didn't have the rights to.
Do you really wanna make me cry? Who better than Canyon? None of you are better than Canyon.
But Kanyon did occasionally get the chance to bust out his old WCW gimmick in a few dark matches, as we saw in a recent upload by WWE. Man, Mortis was such a cool gimmick. He looked badass, his moves were awesome, he looked really easy to market. But sadly, WWE never gave Kanyon or Mortis a chance. But hey, at least Kanyon worked for WWE. That's more than the guy that Mortis was created for could say. For much of its existence, WCW suffered from an identity crisis, or rather a how much can we blatantly copy the WWF's identity crisis. In the early 1990s, WCW was plagued with cartoony characters like Oz, Big Josh, and the Ding Dongs. In the mid-90s, they hired Hulk Hogan and tried their best to recreate the magic of Hulkamania from a decade prior with a bunch of wacky characters. But by 1996, WCW had figured out the formula to success. By stepping away from the kiddie stuff and leaning toward morally ambiguous characters and storylines based on real life, it turned the tide and made the company a force to be reckoned with. However, there was one pet project of Eric Bischoff's that he refused to leave in the drawer, a high-concept mini-universe within WCW that encompassed martial arts, action fantasy, and the ultra-popular and controversial fighting games of the day. And yes, Mortis was meant to be a big part of that world. It seemed like a slam dunk of an idea. Nearly every kid has a fascination with martial arts at some point, and if you can make that work in a wrestling storyline, that could be pretty neat. I mean, why do you think WMAC Masters lives on in the hearts and minds of a generation? But instead of being a winner of an angle, it's since become a punchline in the annals of wrestling history, doomed to compete with far more captivating stuff surrounding it and never getting a fighting chance. So what happened? Let's find out as we examine Blood Runs Cold. Eric Bischoff's affection for martial arts, karate in particular, started well before his time in the wrestling business. A competitor in his own right, one of the Bish's earliest marketing ideas came in the form of a Ninja Star game for kids. While trying to sell ads for the game on local television, he approached Vern Gagne, the owner of the American Wrestling Association. Vern didn't care for the Ninja Stars, but he liked the cut of Eric's jib, so in 1987 he offered him a spot as an announcer, and the rest is history. We jump ahead to 1996. As WCW continued to find its own identity as they battled the WWF, Ray Lloyd had spent the last several years in the Georgia independent scene and in Japan, even doing the occasional enhancement work for WCW. Lloyd had developed a friendship with Diamond Dallas Page, who also happened to be neighbors and good friends with Eric Bischoff. After hearing Ray out on some ideas and learning about Lloyd's legitimate martial arts background, DDP managed to broker a meeting between the two. According to Lloyd himself, the two talked for hours, and at the end of that conversation, Eric offered Ray a WCW deal on the spot, telling him to cancel his remaining indie bookings and to vanish from public view until further notice. Bischoff had a desire to create a world of characters that would open up opportunities for marketing and merchandising deals, get them a larger foothold in the video game world, things the WWF already had going for them. And after linking up with Lloyd, the plan was set in motion to bring this world to life in WCW. Back in the mid-90s, Mortal Kombat was one of the most popular video games around. It was revolutionary from a production standpoint and was also a lightning rod of controversy for its excessive violence and bloodshed. I mean, seriously, those fighters should eat some spinach because their platelet counts have to be through the floor. Too nerdy of a joke? Two of MK's most enduring characters are Scorpion and Sub-Zero, but since it's difficult and somewhat impractical to harpoon your opponent in a wrestling match, naturally the call was made for Lloyd to play a character based on the fighter who could control ice. Thus, Glacier was born. Ah yes, the mighty Glacier, and as we all know, glaciers are known for, moving quickly, like in karate. Bischoff enlisted the Atlanta-based visual effects company AFX Studios to help create the character, design his costume, and refine the presentation. While all that was going on, Diamond Dallas Page was tasked with helping recruit and produce the additional talent needed for the new angle. He ultimately picked the aforementioned Canyon to play Glacier's chief rival, Mortis, and Brian Clark, the former Atom Bomb in the WWF, to play his partner in Wrath. All good in theory, but there was a significant roadblock in all this: promo ability. See, Canyon spoke with a lisp, Brian Clark had a southern accent, and Lloyd, well...
The name Glacier was given to me by my master. It's an appreciation for the elements, the awesome strength and the power that's derived from the elements. I was very happy to let him become my sensei, which in Japanese means teacher.
Look, I'm sure he's a great guy and all, but is that the voice you expected to come out of a guy who looked like that? Simply put, the gang needed a mouthpiece, someone who could tie all this craziness together. After WCW had initially reached out to Gary Hart and Oliver Humperdinck, Canyon suggested that his friend James Mitchell become their manager. Mitchell, who had worked in Smoky Mountain Wrestling as Daryl Van Horn, created the character of James Vandenberg, a mysterious individual who collected rare human oddities.
The strange, the unusual, the bizarre.
So far, you don't have a problem.
And the forbidden.
Oh, so that's where Don Callis got the idea when he formed the Oddities in the WWF. Finally, the pieces were in place and the storyline was ready to go. In April of 1996, the hype train finally left the station. Oh my God, that music, that setting, they weren't even trying to hide the inspiration for this character. These high-production vignettes would run for weeks, and weeks, and weeks, with the G-Man showing off all his nifty martial arts moves. I'll admit, this looks pretty cool. I can't wait for him to show up in WCW and use his wicked karate moves on some of the other wrestlers. Ooh, I wonder if he'll have ice powers too. I wonder how they're going to incorporate the...
What is he doing? God!
Actually, you know what? Fuck all that. This is way cooler. With one drop of the leg, the New World Order was born, and Blood Runs Cold was seemingly dead on arrival. This new, edgy group of guys portrayed like invaders from the other company, staging a hostile takeover, seemed a lot more fresh and interesting to fans than a glorified Power Ranger in the snow. WCW was just coming out of the green, foggy funk of the Dungeon of Doom storyline, and now that they'd struck gold with the black and white, there was no way this storyline was going to hit the same. But hey, WCW had already spent a lot of money on this character, and there was no way they weren't going to try and recoup that investment. Even though the NWO would become WCW's #1 priority, they were still going to go through with the storyline. Just let it marinate a little bit longer. Yeah. See where it goes. Glacier was set to debut in July, but the NWO's arrival put that on ice for another several months. While Hogan, Hall, and Nash were revolutionizing the wrestling business, Glacier was put in stasis. Finally, that September, it was time to pull the trigger and debut the Big Blue Guy. I can't wait to see him on Nitro. WCW Saturday Night? WCW Pro? Oh man, I am so sorry. But take a look at this grand entrance. We've got lasers, we've got snow, we've got karate moves, we have this dark blue light that stays on for the entire match, and we all know how well that sort of thing gets over. After all, with all the time and money and effort put into this character, why would you want the fans to see it? With his dizzying array of kicks and throws, Glacier easily bested the Gambler, who, let's be honest, is the coolest jobber gimmick of all time. 1 week later, Glacier made his long-awaited Nitro debut, beating Big Bubba Rogers in similar fashion. He moved unlike most other wrestlers at the time, and while he certainly looked good doing it, most of the guys he wrestled seemed a little befuddled on how to work with him. After only 4 matches, Glacier was taken off of TV for a whopping 10 weeks. Apparently Midway, the game company behind the Mortal Kombat series, caught wind of this very obvious case of trademark infringement and threatened to sue unless some changes were made to the gimmick. Wow, who could have imagined the company that gave us Arachnaman and the Renegade would get caught trying to steal someone's IP again? If only it were Memphis in the 1980s. Now, that would have been a copyright attorney's paradise. Instead of bursting through the proverbial ice with great fanfare as intended, Glacier basically slipped, stumbled, and fell, while other, more important and relevant characters and programs skated around him. A stripped-down, less Sub-Zero-esque Glacier made his return in early December and went back to what he was doing the first time, beating non-entities and random luchadors. It only added to the feeling that the character was a lonely iceberg adrift in the middle of the sea. Okay, seriously, I need to cool it with all the ice puns. Oh, damn it! Finally, in the early spring, it was time to add some more characters to the Blood Runs Cold mythos. Shortly before Uncensored 1997, nearly a full year after those Glacier vignettes first began airing, Vandenberg and his first oddity, Mortis, made their debuts. The Mortis character was a pit fighter from Taiwan who seemed to have a shared history with the Iceman, and the two were set to face off at the pay-per-view. Now, just because the angle had been put on the back burner for months doesn't mean that the guys involved didn't work hard in preparation. I mean, Canyon took karate lessons to help better himself for the role of Mortis, and he and Glacier worked really hard on their match ahead of time. And boy, it sure looked like it. It was very clear that the match, full of martial arts maneuvers, was very carefully and painstakingly rehearsed. Still, the fans dug it and Glacier came out on top, but old Vandy had another ace up his sleeve.
Who's he calling for? Who?
Oh, man.
Who in the world is this?
Our hero may have won the battle, but the war had just begun, as now Wrath had joined the menagerie and helped Mort put the beat down on Glacier. For the next several weeks, Mortis and Wrath attacking Glacier after a flash win became a rinse and repeat cycle. They'd even gone so far as to steal his fancy helmet. A rematch with Glacier and Mortis at Slamboree lasted less than 2 minutes before Wrath interfered. But before you ask why this couldn't just have been an angle on Nitro, a new character arrived.
Penalty.
Hey!
Wait, we got a fan in.
Who is that? There's a fan in the ring.
Enter Garrett Bischoff's karate instructor. I mean, 3-time world karate champion Ernest the Cat Miller. Though Miller had competed in WCW before this, even losing a match to Glacier on Worldwide earlier in the year, commentary had to pretend that they had never seen them before until they realized who it was and acted as if Chuck Norris himself had hopped the barricade. Now I want you to take a good look at the lineup they had for this storyline. You had a Sub-Zero proxy, a spooky skeleton man, a big jacked up freak, and just some dude. It seems like every new character they were adding to the mix got less and less creative. With Miller by his side, Glacier had someone to even the odds that didn't really need evening. Glacier and Wrath met in their first one-on-one match at the Great American Bash, where Mortis was handcuffed at ringside to prevent interference. Glacier outsmarted the heels yet again, using a chain thrown into the ring to down Wrath before being handcuffed to the ring himself and beat down. Apparently they couldn't find another babysitter for little Garrett that day, as Ernest was nowhere to be found. At this point, the feud had been going on for about 4 months, yet nothing had been done to help flesh out the characters or their supposed backstory with each other, and it was also going nowhere. I mean, how could it when Glacier is able to beat both of those guys with or without Ernest Miller's help? And to top it all off, all the karate moves they emphasized in the beginning were barely being used by this point in the feud. Yet, they persisted. Since it was a school night, Ernest Miller was able to save Glacier the following night on Nitro, setting up a tag team match at Bash at the Beach. And wouldn't you know it, now that he actually had some help, Glacier wound up eating his first loss in WCW. It was obvious the act had gone stale, while the NWO roster had now ballooned into double digits. Whether it was due to a lack of interest by the bookers or a lack of time to commit to it, it was decided that the Blood Runs Cold angle would finally reach its end. And while it would all in all be a positive for Mortis and Wrath, it was bad news for Glacier. Wrath's power and Mortis's cool look and moveset helped them stand apart from much of the generic roster, as they had decent success in the tag team division. And while Glacier and Miller started out strong, they soon began to falter, unable to break out of Saturday Night Purgatory. By the end of the year, Glacier found himself as fodder for Bill Goldberg's unbeaten streak, as Goldberg had basically swooped the push that was originally envisioned for Glacier. Things finally changed up a bit in January of '98, when Glacier turned heel on the Cat after another match against Wrath and Mortis. Then he lost to him! Unfortunately, the heel turn didn't help Glacier get much heat. He spent the next few months floundering as a jobber to the stars on the important shows, while feuding with gentleman Chris Adams on Saturday night over who had the best super kick. Finally, some stakes! Not to be satisfied with merely one feud built around the effectiveness of his cryonic kick, in May they brought this burning issue to the main roster as Glacier feuded with Saturn of Raven's flock. But the feud took an unexpected turn when the former Mortis, now unmasked as Canyon, cost Saturn a match to Glacier before the angle eventually sputtered out. Then on the June 29th episode of Nitro, Glacier was steamrolled once again by Goldberg, injuring his knee in the process. While Glacier continued to spin into obscurity, Canyon's change of scenery proved very helpful for his WCW career. Glacier returned to action that November and actually built up a nice little win-loss record. Then by the end of the month, WCW resurrected the Blood Runs Cold angle for a brief moment when Wrath attacked both Glacier and Canyon before their match, then later beat Glacier in his final pay-per-view appearance at World War III. By this point, Glacier was ice cold in the worst possible way. After a losing streak, he abandoned the gimmick entirely, selling it to Kaz Hayashi before vanishing from television. While he was gone, Canyon would continue to pick up steam as part of the Jersey Triad, Wrath would go by his real name of Brian Clark and link up with Brian Adams to form Chronic, James Vandenberg briefly hosted his own promo segment before being taken off TV for the rest of his contract, and Ernest the Cat Miller would end up being one of the most interesting and entertaining characters that WCW had at the time? Whew, did not see that coming. Now hit his terrible network dub. Then in August of '99, Ray Lloyd returned to WCW television, completely thawed and repackaged as the cruel Coach Buzz Stern.
Your clock broke, son? What are you, some kind of idiot? The letters WCW probably meant to most of you, we cannot wrestle. Push it. You're supposed to attack life with guts, not have a gut.
But the company barely gave Coach the old college try, especially once his biggest ally in the office, Eric Bischoff, was relieved of his duties as WCW president that September. He managed a jobber named Luther Biggs for a few matches and only wrestled one match under the gimmick before he was finally released from his contract that November. Now you would think that this is the end of the story. However, who doesn't love a good reboot?
No, wait a minute. Oh, dear God, no.
At the Mayhem pay-per-view in November of 2000, WCW began running the exact same vignettes of Glacier from 1996, only now the graphics said that blood would run colder and that the world would change again. Is this any surprise coming from the company that revived the NWO 3 or 4 times too many? This time, though, the commentary team had no patience for the gimmick and shat on the vignettes thoroughly.
What are we thinking doing that crap again? It didn't work the first time. Why are we doing it this time?
In January of 2001, the beginning of WCW's final months, Glacier returned, old gimmick and all, to save his biggest fan Norman Smiley. And by save, I mean glad hand with the fans while Screamin' Norman got his ass kicked by his opponents.
I would not want to be Mike Awesome when Glacier gets to the ring, I can tell you that. Whenever he gets to the ring.
Okay, now this is an angle that I can get behind. Glacier being repackaged as this delusional superhero is hilarious stuff. I cannot wait to see, what's that? They stopped doing it after a few weeks and he was never seen on WCW again? Ah, just when it was getting good. In the end, the Glacier gimmick was a Glacier-sized waste of time and money for WCW. Lots and lots of money. Not only did it cost an arm and a leg just to come up with the character, but that elaborate entrance he had with the lasers and the snow, the entrance he would get on every show, whether it was for TV or not, $9,000 dues a pop. When it was all said and done, WCW spent roughly $500,000 on Glacier's presentation alone. Damn, all that for some snow? Tony Montana had the right business plan. Lots of people think the Blood Runs Cold universe was a few years too late, that it would have done much better back when more cartoonish characters were the norm. And while that is certainly true, I would argue that it was also a few years too early. If this storyline came out in the last 10 years or so and everything else was the same but they had better writing, I think this stuff would have gone over like gangbusters. I mean, big dudes kicking the crap out of each other, doing innovative moves, that was basically Ring of Honor. Once the New World Order caught fire, WCW finally had the marketing power they wanted, and there was no need for this bootleg Mortal Kombat. So we'll never know if it would have worked in a timeline without the NWO. But sure enough, they did end up in the next WCW video game. Well, Glacier and Wrath did anyway. Damn, they did Mortis dirty. Ray Lloyd never got a look at the WWF after the WCW buyout, but he did go on to wrestle on and off for several more years, working matches in ROH and Chikara, working as a producer in TNA, even getting a chance to shine in the very first AEW pay-per-view in 2019 before becoming an agent there. By all accounts, Lloyd is a heck of a guy, but Glacier will go down in wrestling history as a character whose performance could never match the unbelievable hype he was given. A good idea at a bad time, and that's just cold-blooded. But what did you think of Glacier and the rest of the Blood Run's Cold Gang? Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time. This is fine.